Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Dr. Pratt Harris. I just wrapped up a chat with members of our research team for the community's experiences and perceptions of the Baltimore City Police Department survey. We meet every 2 weeks, pretty much every 2 weeks, to give a community update on where we are with this survey. And one of the things I am thankful to kind of talk about today is our process as relates to recruiting participants during the COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, what we've experienced during this data collection season with the Omicron variant case increase. What you'll note is that we have these sessions recorded, and these are accessible beyond this space because everyone in the world who would like to join us isn't necessarily logged in at 11:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, but you can actually access this via a link that I'm going to share at the very end, which gives you the opportunity to ask questions that you may not have been able to ask during this brief kind of discussion. We already are familiar with the fact that this is the Baltimore City Police Department consent decree that we are operating under as relates to the community survey. And we at Morgan State University work in proximity with the Baltimore Police Department monitoring team. The survey was funded via the monitoring team through Morgan State University's Institute for Urban Research. And we have some group of folks from Morgan State University's Department of Sociology, Anthropology, and Criminology and Criminal Justice, who are pretty well versed in this process, where many actually helped to collect data during time one of the community survey. During this season, we have community interviewers who represent members of the community, students. We also have students who are not Morgan students. We have a University of Delaware doctoral student, and we have a Howard University PhD student as well, who assist in this process in many capacities. So we consistently share that we responded to an RFP in summer of 2018 to begin this process. It continued through the current time with time 2 data collection. One of the things I'm shedding light on today is that we operate via a survey research team. And the names of the folks who are doing this work are included on the screen. One of the things I'm going to highlight as we continue is the role of Dr. Timothy Kinlock from University of Baltimore and Kenneth Appiah-Kubi, a graduate of Morgan Sociology Department, and how their contribution has changed just a little bit to help accommodate some of our needs at the present time, given the more recent Omicron uptick that has now gone through a downward spiral, thankfully, very recently. We are following the same schedule we presented very recently, where we began this process of doing the proposal for the time 2 data collection in March of 2020. So nearly 2 years ago, that process began, and working through a budget and preliminary preparation continued through January of 2022. There have been modifications to the survey through September of 2021. We've had translations by translators who translated the survey from Spanish to Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, and French. And that was completed this past year. We also have what's called the 3 sample preparation that includes our identifying persons via a random identification of addresses, random selection of participants on random streets, and a possible purposes sampling technique. And that preparation began July of 2020 and continued through December of 2022. We're acknowledging that training officially began for data collection in September of 2021, and it's continuous because while community interviewers are actually doing the interviews, there's ongoing training in this process. And data collection began in November of 2021 and continues through March of 2022 with an analysis and report, final report to be prepared by May of 2022. And report outs that began in November when we started these community conversations. Each possible participant has been mailed an invitation and or a traditional invitation and or a postcard. So these are examples of what they've gotten in the mail, inviting them to participate in this survey. One of the things we highlighted in the previous community update is that we talked about the incentive, and this letter shares that each participant is compensated $25 for their time. So that's part of our conversation in terms of getting folks to participate. All of our community interviewers, the research team, is certified to conduct human subject research via CITI certification. We follow policies and procedures of the protection of human subjects by Morgan State University's Institutional Review Board. We're maintaining privacy, confidentiality, and anonymity of participants. This is just a quick example of what the survey would look like in the beginning, at least the introduction in Arabic. And as I mentioned, there are links that we have access to of the survey in the SCARF languages, Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, and French. What we are acknowledging today, as we've done consistently, is that we are partaking in what's called part 1 of the community survey interview process, which includes random street address sample. I've already talked about these invitations mailed out up to 4 times. We mailed out invitations beginning in the fall. And we are at the point, if you see the item highlighted in green, to consider mailing out invitations again this month. And I'll explain that in a moment. What we're acknowledging is that those invitations are sent out on a rolling basis. And I'll explain that as well in a moment. What we were able to do, and I'll talk more in depth about that in the next couple of screens, is to identify dedicated recruiters. And a group of dedicated recruiters began on January the 26th. So their job is strictly to recruit participants to be scheduled to meet with interviewers via Zoom or phone to participate in this process. And interviews are done by community interviewers, and obviously via the survey. And in the past, I've shared the link, and the link is available here for the actual survey that the interviewers are using to participate, to engage interview participants. Our end goal is to have a sample of 600 participants. And how do we get to that? Well, we send out an invitation. We confirm eligibility once we do engage. So the engagement includes participants who receive an invitation, call the phone number on the invitation, sharing that they are eligible and available to participate, also completing a link that shares their availability and interest in participating, and also being invited via a address or street recruitment process, confirming that they're 18 years of age or older and they live in Baltimore City. And that is like mixed in this process is a part of like a random selection of participants. Later on, it will become via the purposive sample, which we have not begun as yet. That random selection process, again, is via the random streets and then the random addresses. The purposive sample, once we exhaust the random streets, random address list, we'll move into purposive sample to assess who was included in the survey. And the who was included in the survey means that they represent the population. On the next screen, we'll talk about that. And were some of the hard to reach persons included. Members of the LGBTQ, persons where English is not the primary language, persons who squeegee for a living, or persons who will report that they are homeless. And the match that we're looking for is based upon the US Census in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, educational level, income level, and that type of thing. And that will help us, this particular guide helps us to determine if we need to do a purposive sample. But again, this happens once we collect the data and get to like some numbers that speak to our getting to that 600 participant number. Well, how do we do this? We've already talked about sending out invitations. We're acknowledging that part of this process is based upon our identifying people via community canvassing. Community canvassing means a couple of things. It now means something that's just started on the 27th of January, door knocking or at the random addresses, approaching people on the randomly selected streets. That's another part of community canvassing. And part of that is the Google mapping. So what's happened is we have people who actually are responsible on our team. We have Tanea White. She's a graduate research assistant whose primary responsibility is to kind of take a look at these addresses and see if there are actually spaces that exist in Baltimore City, and confirming whether or not those spaces actually exist. And there's a spreadsheet that we use to confirm, if we should make the attempt to go out to this location, and or to confirm why we may have gotten some mail kicked back to us from a particular address. So her task has been that part of the community canvassing. And then we have community canvassing that includes the recruiters who are currently out identifying possible participants and them making note of whether or not an address is a good address, meaning is there an actual space that reflects this address, and at the same time recruiting participants to participate. So they're doing a couple of things when they're out recruiting. And canvassing part 3, we're not there yet. That would take place when we get to the point of doing a purposive sample. As I mentioned last time, we talked about incentives. The goal with incentives is to inspire participation. It's not the lead thing. We want people to share their thoughts and experiences relative to the Baltimore City Police Department, but we are compensating people for their time. And as I mentioned, that's $25 per interview that persons participate in. We know empirically speaking that incentives help to increase the response rate. So at this point where we've been recruiting people during a global pandemic, one of the things that we've talked about as a team of researchers, as a collective in this space where we've engaged with the monitors and others, is that the COVID-19 pandemic has presented challenges for everyone. This includes challenges when it comes to conducting human subject research, being mindful that our task is to be safe and maintain our health. So we've been consistently acknowledging the need to do the remote interview, which includes the possibility of interviewing persons by phone or Zoom. And what we found is that once we are able to schedule someone, they're more likely to want to engage by phone. We've also definitely done some Zoom interviews, which is ideal from the researcher's perspective, because you're actually having a conversation with folks like we would have done if it weren't for the pandemic. Beginning in December, we had resource issues, undoubtedly. We also all were impacted, the research team, by the Omicron variant. So we had to definitely take a look and step back to kind of see how we would go about engaging. We went out in November to do street canvassing, and that kind of worked. But we also are adhering to the protocol, which means that we want to engage beyond the street canvassing, or in addition to the street canvassing on those randomly selected streets. Initially, we were not knocking on doors because of the uptick, or not even an uptick, because of COVID-19 in general. But what's happened from December through January is there was an uptick in cases where persons were testing positive because of the Omicron variant, and we did not want to engage in any way with human subjects who were not expecting us, because they want to maintain their safety and health, and we want to do the same thing. But what's happened since January 27th, and we've seen a decline, as you see in this bottom image, in COVID cases up till yesterday, in fact. We have been able to go out and with confidence that we're following protocols, still maintaining 6 feet of distance, keeping our masks on, sanitizing our hands. We've actually been able to go out and do recruitment. And the recruitment includes us identifying people from the randomly selected streets, but we do them in chunks. So each week, beginning on the 27th of January, we've actually gone out and identified a chunk of streets. So the first week was like 3 streets based upon one zip code that those streets happen to fall under, and do the door knocking, do the canvassing to see if those streets or those addresses were good addresses. And also we've actually knocked on doors, which I find to be remarkable, because for myself, I've been hesitant about engaging with human subjects, but our recruiters have done the work, and I managed to kind of observe the process being quite successful in terms of connecting with people that we would not have otherwise connected with, because they're not necessarily responding to the mail, the traditional invitation, or the postcard. So what's happened is Dr. Timothy Kinloch is a statistician, world-renowned researcher who has been involved in this process as a statistician for this project, offering insight, advice on the sample. He was also to later on help with the analysis of data, meaning giving insight and advice on the analysis of data. But Dr. Timothy Kinloch took a step back for some health concerns and his responsibilities at University of Baltimore, and he's no longer the statistician or a statistician on this particular project. Now, this wasn't planned. This was Dr. Kinloch's decision, but then that opened up the door for us to look at our budget and say, you know what, we actually need a recruiter, someone who's had the experience of working on this particular project to help us really go in to identify participants. So thankfully, Kenneth Apiakubi, who worked on the Time One data collection, he was an interviewer. He began to train interviewers. Then he became an analyst, where he analyzed some of the data and helped to get the final report kind of done in that way. He came on officially on the 27th of January as a senior recruiter, and he and both Aaliyah are in the field recruiting participants via those means that I mentioned earlier. Still following the COVID-19 protocols, obviously, distanced, scheduling the remote virtual interviews, and we've seen some progress and some successes relative to that process. Where this is, 10 days since that started, we're kind of maneuvering through that to follow through on the practices that speak to the protocols that we have outlined in our methodology. So what I'm about to do is highlight the link here, and just make certain that you all have the opportunity. Let me just exit out of here because it's not allowing me to highlight like I like to. That you all have the opportunity to ask questions using this link if you're not able to ask them here, because what we're doing is kind of maintaining some consistency regarding the kinds of questions we're getting, making certain that we're answering questions of members of the community. If someone else who is not here sees this video, they're able to hopefully access this link and actually pose questions using this link, again, because we are maintaining some consistency. And what I just did is I posted that link onto the chat. If you have a question, you can't quite answer it at the moment, you can click that link to ask the question, or we have 9 minutes. If you have any questions about what I've shared thus far, please do chime in and go away. I will acknowledge that we have several members of our research team on the call. They could give you insight as it relates to what is it like to be a community interviewer. We'll eventually share what some of our findings are in terms of what people are saying as they participate in the interview. We are, however, consistently maintaining confidence as relates to those who are participating. So for example, Caroline is one of our community interviewers. She'll probably tell you that she doesn't even know the names necessarily of the persons she's interviewed. And that's intentional because we're still maintaining confidence with our participants. Any questions or comments, observations, thoughts, anything anyone want to chime in on as we conclude? And again, you can use that link if you so choose. Okay, so what I'm about to do is schedule the next community update, which will be 2 weeks from today, which is the 22nd of February. I'll make certain that this particular recording is included on there's a document that everyone has access to when you schedule to participate in the community update. It has the links to all the recorded community updates and the training that we've done. So everyone will have access to that. And you'll also have access via that tool. You actually have access, because that's the link to the question and answer piece that you see in your chat. And with all that being said, I bid you farewell. I'm going to prepare for my meeting with the monitors. So I'm going to conclude this call and then chime back in on this very link. So take good care, everyone.